number one source, Sports Card Nation. The hobby is the people. Sports Card Nation.
What is up? Episode 275 of Sports Card Nation. Excited, as always, to be back for another week and another episode. Really excited for this episode. And so, little backstory about how this guest is appearing on this week's show. And this gentleman reached out to me to say thank you for cleaning the Jefferson Burdick grave, and he signed his email with his name, and I instantly recognized who he was, and wrote back, and he gave me his number, and we exchanged some text and a phone call, and I asked him, hey, I would love for you to come on the podcast if you're willing to do it, and talk about your collection, the hobby, things you like, things you don't like, that sort of thing. And in these, getting to know him through these small chats and text, just really enjoyed the conversation. And he agreed to come on, and here is the part one of that conversation with renowned collector Marshall Fogel. Many know him as the owner of one of the three PSA 10 1952 Topps Mantle, but his collection is way more than that, as most know. Want to give a special shout out to the vintage chat room I belong to on IG. Mentioned to those guys that I was having Marshall on, and got some great questions from them, which I asked Marshall himself. So shout out to those guys. Doesn't do a lot of this type of stuff, so really glad he made Sports Card Nation, time for us here. So with that, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll be back with Marshall Fogel.
Iron Sports Cards is your number one source for all your PSA and other grading submissions. Their elite status improves turnaround times. Heck, they even provide the card savers. Their chat rooms provide updates on all your submissions. They also offer wax options and single cards to cover all the bases. Check them out on Facebook at Iron Sports Cards Group, or on the web at ironsportscards.com, or even give them a call at 1-877-IRON-PSA. Rob's got you covered.
Are you a new sports cards collector or someone returning to the hobby? Maybe you're just looking for a friendly, trustworthy hobby community to hang out with and enjoy collecting. Midwest Box Breaks has been bringing collectors together for many years with affordable breaks, helpful threads, and a Discord group packed with generous people who genuinely care about the hobby and other collectors. Check out the breaks at MidwestBoxBreaks.com. Our goal is to bring you as much value as possible. Also, find us on Twitter at Midwest Box Breaks.
Also, remember to check out Midwest Box Breaks Marketplace for breaks, packs, and single cards from over 300 trusted sellers. Apply to sell today at iso.gg/Midwest Box Breaks. All right, real happy and excited to talk to the next gentleman on the Sports Card Shop guest line here on Sports Card Nation. Highly regarded collector, arguably probably the greatest collection, currently. And we're going to talk about that and other things of the hobby. I want to welcome to the show Mr. Marshall Fogel. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me on as a guest. I look forward to the interview.
Well, I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate your time. And again, you could easily say no, and you didn't, and I'm appreciative of that. Like I said in the intro there, Marshall, you have no one will debate that you have an awesome collection. Much of it is known. When you have such a great collection, do you have like a favorite item, or is that like asking somebody, who your favorite kid is, and you love all your kids, or at least most people do equally. How do you answer a question like that? Does one item stand out above all, or not necessarily?
Well, I have many favorite items with a collection of the size that I have. I can give you some example. The 52 Mantle card that's considered the Holy Grail. I have the only known real photograph by Carl Horner of the Hannes Wagner image that's on the Tito 6 card. And lastly, I have a Lou Gehrig bat that he signed just before his death, where he wrote, "To Jerry, may you take better advantage of this than I did, Lou Gehrig." And it's kind of an emotional experience when you hold a game-used bat of Lou Gehrig with that inscription.
Yeah, no doubt. Speaking of the Mantle, Gem Mint 10, only 3 copies in the world. We saw recently what a 9.5 SGC did. I mean, how do you hold your, a PSA 10 to that? Not necessarily. You don't have to say what do you think it's necessarily worth, but just kind of your thoughts on that sale and your card.
I think the card is considered the Holy Grail for a couple very valid reasons. One, Mike Baker, who was graded all 3 of the 10s, wrote a letter saying that this is the best one. He also graded all the 9s and again said that the 10 that I have is the best one. And the reason for it is it did not come out of the Rosen Fine. That's not necessarily the reason, but it was bought in a pack. There are 2 types of Mantle cards, Type 1 and Type 2. And that has to do with the line underneath the white part of the bottom of the card. And so mine is a Type 1, where all the Rosen Fines are Type 2s, which has a little white spot on in the blue background. So not that there's anything wrong with the other cards, but Joe Orlando, who was president of Collectors Universe, wrote a letter saying he also believed that this was the best. It's almost like someone from heaven made the card, and it's amazing that it lasted in such good condition for all these years and never was damaged in any way.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's one of the holy grails. There's not a ton in the hobby. It's right there, if not number one. Arguably right. I think it's right there. We're going to talk about one maybe coming up the turnpike here, but you have a great collection. Obviously, you're proud of it. You've talked about it. You've shared some photos of that collection. We know a lot of other collectors are not maybe as open about their collections, or they're more private about what they have and maybe don't have. Where does that, why are you, I love the fact that you're open about it, but why, I guess, would be my question.
Well, I've always had a community spirit. I served as a member of the Denver Indian Health Board, Father Woody's Homeless Shelter, and a lot of other charities. And I believe in community response. In other words, I like sharing it with the community, such as displaying it at the museum at Yankee Stadium. I did the All-Star game when Atlantic lost the All-Star game, and I have also displayed it in many museums. So basically, to be honest with you, I get a real thrill and a kick out of letting other people enjoy the collection, and so I enjoy sharing it. I respect those that want to keep it in private, but on the other hand, I call my collection the Hall of Legends, and I know that people who've gone to Cooperstown and also seen parts of my collection really believe that it's a lot easier to come to Denver, Colorado than it is to go to Cooperstown, and I have a lot of nice items to share with the public, and like I said, I enjoy it.
Yeah, and like I said, I appreciate that fact, right? Cards are meant to be seen and enjoyed, whether they're your own or you can see someone else's awesome collection, obviously, in your case. When it comes to acquiring a new item, whether that be a baseball card or a piece of memorabilia, is it generally through auctions that you do that, or do you get people who will call you up like via maybe a private sale and say, hey, Mr. Fogel, I have this. You might be interested in it. How do you go about adding to your collection?
Well, it's an evolutionary process, and part of it has to do with it. I believe I had a genetic addiction to collecting. Like I always was a child, like to buy baseball cards for a nickel a pack, and also I liked collecting comic books. I destroyed all of that by handling it. But I came from an environment where I had to work hard all my life, and I worked construction. I left the house with a law degree and a license with $200. So I made it on my own, and that's part of why I like sharing it with other people that couldn't afford it, as I can now, to own all this stuff. So as far as being more direct with your question, basically it started with me going to Chicago in 1989 with my family. And I knew about the national convention there, and that's when I really got hooked. But, you could buy cards for $2 a piece. This is before authentication services sprang forward.
Yep.
And, I kind of had a genetic nose to what to collect. I didn't know a lot about baseball history. And so after I left the show, I studied a lot about baseball history and learned what to collect. And so I basically was found out by dealers, and they would call me and tell me what they wanted to sell. And then I took SCD, the trader issue, and waited for FedEx to come and then make phone calls to buy stuff. So in the beginning, I was contacted by phone and also made calls to start to collect. And then I started going to shows and talking to dealers and learning a little more about how to collect. And then around 2005, 2006, the internet started to become more of a vehicle to collect. And then it sprang into what we have today, where you can, make bids, go on eBay, and use the internet and catalogs and the iPhone to collect.
Yeah, no doubt. And like you said, I read a previous interview you did talking about kind of your early start, and obviously before grading was in full bloom, and unfortunately buying cards that later turned out to be trimmed. And that's why I tell people that the grading card industry is so important to the hobby and the industry, because it it proves provenance, proves authenticity, and obviously while it's subjective, it also gives a condition grade of said cards. And I know you try to stay in the 8, 9, 10 as far as graded cards. If you can speak to a little bit of that, and do you have any cards that are not graded, or is all your collection of the graded variety?
Well, the history of the grading system started around 1996 when David Hall, who became the president of Collectors Universe, had a collection of cards. And there was a fellow named Alan Hager who invented the holder. Mm-hmm. And Alan Hager was a genius in that sense. He kind of fell to the side, and then David Hall bought the patent rights for $50,000 for the holders that hold baseball cards at the time, or so any kind of card, whether it's non-sports or other sports. So that launched this whole idea of authenticating cards. One has to remember, it was okay to trim cards back when it was a hobby. There were trade magazines and different trade journals that would say these cards are beautifully trimmed. So there was a point in the early days before grading that it was okay to trim cards. So they were worth not a lot of money. People that collected would go to your house and they'd sit in the basement and they'd trade cards and trim them and grade them and had a lot of fun. Well, then it, of course, grew into a monster when David Hall decided to sell his collection under pressure because people didn't want him collecting. and grading cards because, of course, he could grade his own cards subjectively, and he was smart enough to sell his collection and launched this whole idea of grading cards, which every dealer hated. They didn't want to lose the opportunity for themselves to grade cars. But over time, it caught on because there had to be some format, some formal way in which to grade cars where everybody had confidence in the grading system. Yes, it is subjective. You know, what's the difference between an 8 and an 8.5 and an 8.5 and a 9? Well, you know, when you have now, instead of 2 graders, when it all got started, they have probably over 100 graders that see things differently. So, but overall, my view of it is it's a good system. There are competitive grading services that grade cards. There's some that I don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
But each person has to find confidence in the grading system, and obviously PSA, they're top of the heap in terms of a difference in what they call an 8 and what another grading service calls an 8. It may be the same, but the reputation of PSA seems to bring more money for the cards.
Yeah, no doubt. I know you mentioned them. I think you answered this question already. It was one on my list, but I'll ask it just to confirm. You mentioned with Mike Baker. I see his hologram, his holographic sticker on some of a few cards in the collection. Is that to certify that he graded it? His eyes were the one that graded the card.
Well, I'm going to go back a minute. You asked me if I have ungraded cards. I forgot to answer that. I do. I have a pretty good eye by now, and some of the cards that I have that are ungraded are mostly some commons, but I just don't feel like I want to spend the money to grade them. But I don't have a lot of them, but I have some that are ungraded. As far as Mike Baker's concerned, he's kind of the father of grading.
Yeah.
And he came to me with an idea of this sticker. Instead of having to remove the card from the holder and regrade it, if you have an 8 and it's outstanding, then you get either a gold, a silver, or with the black sticker on it. And he asked me if I'd buy into that. I don't mean financially, but emotionally. And I said, sure. So he came to my house just while he was launching this service, and I became his poster boy, and I really believe in what he's doing, and obviously it's working.
Time for a quick break, but we'll be right back. For more than 30 years, Robert Edward Auctions has been the nation's premier auction house, specializing in sports memorabilia and trading cards. With significant experience and expertise in all major sport, non-sport, and Americana collectibles, REA has helped clients achieve record-breaking prices for their items and has done so with a reputation for integrity and transparency. By actively partnering with collectors and enthusiasts throughout the entire process, REA has created the hobby's most trusted forum for selling high-quality collectibles. Go to robertedwardauctions.com for more information on how to buy or sell in their next auction. Let's go! You are listening to the Sports Card Nation podcast.
You know, a hot-button topic or a hot-button question, I don't even think it's a question, Marshall, to answer sort of my own question is, you know, people like to say, well, cards can't be an investment. And I will always argue that, sure, they can. You don't have to do it for that reason necessarily. And if you do, there's nothing wrong with that either. But for someone to say, you know, cards are not an investment class, I think we've seen what some of these cards have went for, and you cannot, you know, when you look at that, I don't even think there's an argument. You're a lawyer, so I'm gonna acquiesce to your expertise and a hobbyist. You know, when someone says, well, you know, sports cards are not an investment, how do you respond to a statement such as that?
Well, it's a tiered system, you know. When I started collecting as a little kid, it was a hobby. You know, you didn't care about centering and creases, and you just had fun with it. So I've been through the whole evolution of it, from just being a child and enjoying it and having fun then it got to be where I enjoyed it, just collecting, not knowing that it would be worth a lot of money. And then it's morphed into this whole thing about being an investment where it becomes profitable if you know how to collect. So, look, I've always said that people like me, maybe there's a small percentage that have the ability to collect the high-end investment-grade cards. But what sustains the whole industry is the massive amount of vintage cards where people can spend $50 on a mantle or spend $12 million on a mantle. So there's room for everybody. But if it was just an investment class, this thing never would have grown. Basically, the whole industry got started, in my opinion, and this stuff wouldn't be worth it is today. It wasn't for Bill Mastro.
Yep. Nope, I hear
and,
you.
and Al Rosen. If it wasn't for those two, this stuff wouldn't be worth anything like it is today.
Yeah, definitely catalyst, as you just pointed out. I won't disagree there at all. You mentioned 89, that going to that national. Kind of a two-pronged question. Was that your first national, and do you try to make a point to get to every one?
Oh, that's an easy answer to both of your questions. It was my first national out. It was in the basement of a hotel. I think it was a Holiday Inn, but my memory might be compromised on that. But I remember going down there and saying, my gosh, all this stuff, and I didn't know. I thought Ty Cobb at the time might have been a dress designer. That bit, I knew that I was going to get hooked on it. And so I bought a bunch of stuff. They were all ungraded. Some were good, some were bad, and some of them were ugly. The first card I bought was a 53 mantle Topps card, and it turned out to be trimmed. So I wasn't off to the greatest start in the world. Mm-hmm. But I remember going to that national, and I knew about Al Rosen, and I knew about Bill Mastro. But I was so intimidated, I was afraid to introduce myself. I'll never forget it. We laugh about that when later on when I became friends with both of Al and with Bill Mastro. And I did go to a lot of the nationals, and they were fun because in those days, in order to get the stuff, most of the dealers would save the good stuff, I put that in quotes, for the national.
Yeah.
That's not true today. A lot of the desirable items are sold privately now. A great many of them are in auctions, and that answers the first part. The second, I don't go to the shows anymore because it's so commercialized now.
Yep.
And some of the venues are so miserable, like Rosemount in Cleveland. It's because they were cheap. But now they have new ownership on the national, and I think they're going to try to go to cities where you can, like Denver or Las Vegas or somewhere where you can do other things. You can go to shows. You can go on tours. There's something to do. So I haven't been to a national probably in 5 years because there's really nothing for me to do there, and there's nothing for me to really see that I would like to buy. I would go there because a lot of people want me to go there because they want to meet me and talk to me about it. But that's the drawback that I wish that someday I might go and just hang out and sit there and talk to people and get interviewed, and I would enjoy that.
Yeah, I understand. When you got back, you mentioned 89. You kind of started again. Obviously, you mentioned collecting as a kid. Did you jump right into the memorabilia side, or did that something that kind of came after getting back with the cards?
Fortunately, I jumped into it right away because I always thought that if you collect baseball bats, that's a weapon. It's no different than going to the New York Metropolitan Museum and seeing bows and arrows and lances and swords and all that stuff. And in my opinion, the baseball bat is the weapon of the player. I'm not necessarily the pitcher, but that's what makes you great. How do you take a stick and hit a ball 90 miles an hour. When they throw a ball to me at 90 miles an hour, I can't even see it. I don't know how they hit that. And I always wonder, when you play golf, you have to be quiet. You know, they put the ball on the tee. You'd think it'd be the opposite. You'd be cheering, because when you hit a ball with a stick and everybody's cheering, you always think, well, why aren't they being quiet? So it's kind of fun to think about it in that way. But I always enjoyed starting to collect memorabilia, like baseball bats. I love photographs, and I really got into that. My view of collecting is when it was possible. I always collected when people weren't interested in the subject, and that's how I was able to get things that I wanted, that I felt were valued emotionally and financially, so that I wasn't paying the money when it became popular to collect and the demand became greater than the supply.
Yeah, and you were kind of ahead of your time, if I may say, So another thing, and I'm preaching to the choir here, I'm sure with bats, especially bats of vintage era players in comparison to today. Today, a player gets 40, 50 bats made, can have an order, probably overnighted to them the next day if they need 10, 20 more bats. So there's obviously a lot more bats in today's game available than the vintage era. In many cases, you hear that a player used a bat for a whole season, unless one did happen to break, and then they got another one. So there's obviously a lot less of those bats from this generation of the game compared to today's, and obviously that factors into the value and what things go for. I'm sure you agree with that.
I do, and that brings up the whole issue of how do you collect bats, and game use bats particularly. That's what I collect. I'm very much against grading bats. I think that's just a ridiculous thing to do. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
There may be, 25 Ty Cobb game use bats in the world, or maybe 3 or 4 Sandy Koufax game use bats. Now, my Sandy Koufax bat has a 10 marker on it. Well, he couldn't hit a basketball with a bat, so there's not a lot of game use on it. But Ty Cobb's, maybe gets a 3, and there's only 25 of them.
Yep.
You can't grade bats. You can only grade the characteristics. Is there vault mark on it? Is it side written? Is it got nails in it? Because you were allowed to do that because they had to use the bat the whole season. When you collect Garrett, Ruth, DiMaggio, Colfax, or the rare bats like Hack Wilson and so on, there's just not a lot of them. And, you get involved in the grading. I just think it's nonsense, in my opinion. It's the same thing if you buy a Lou Brock bat for $10,000 because he hit a home run, or you buy one for $1,200. What do you care if Lou Brock hit a home run with the bat? No, Lou Brock is not a first-year Hall of Famer or some of the other, Paul Molitor. Just to me, you're wasting your money. Put your money in the value in a Garrett, Ruth, Cobb, Greenberg, Gehringer, some of those bats, Yogi Berra, and the Duke Snyder, and so on, Whitey Ford. That's where you want to. Don't worry about all this stuff about grading. Look at the characteristics of the bat. Don't worry about a pitcher's bat if it doesn't have a lot on it. Use your mind and use common sense. Common sense is the key to collecting.
Yeah.
Secondly,
go ahead.
Well, we'll get into it later on LOAs, but I'll wait till you ask me about that.
Yeah, and listen, the Dodgers weren't paying Sandy Koufax to hit home runs. I think everyone can agree on that. So that's why, again, there's not a lot of wear and tear on those bats. Well, you brought it up, so let's talk about that. We've seen things in the industry, in the hobby, where fakes have been discovered after the fact, unfortunately, in some cases. With a game used bat or any equipment that's not just relegated to bats, it could be a glove and other uniforms, obviously. How difficult is it to authenticate? And I know in knowing about you. That's very important to you. You obviously don't want an item that is not the real McCoy or genuine. So kind of, you brought it up, so we'll segue right into, authenticity.
Well, I don't think they should call letters of authenticity. They're not. They're letters of opinion. You could have 10 people in a room and have 10 different opinions. So I think that's what they should call them, because they're not guaranteeing anything. That letter is only what that one opinion thinks it is. So you really have to understand who's authenticating this stuff. What is their background? What is their education? What is their knowledge? And how accurate are they? So again, read the LOA letters. If it says in there that it's not A, B, C, or D, so it must be real. In other words, that's called the rule of exclusion.
Yep.
Don't buy it. Don't buy it. That's not a science. I checked with the people that are scientists. The rule of exclusion that they use on saying that it must be real if it isn't 5 other different things is just not a science, and it's not an accurate way to collect. Secondly, if it says the circumstances point to the fact that this is really a true game used item, don't buy it, because that's marginalizing it. Or if it says it's possible, what you use is what the U.S. Supreme Court has used in the case. Is it substantially true? Do all the facts point to that this is real? So you use a high standard when you collect memorabilia. The second thing is the auction house is not responsible for telling you if it's real. They take the position if they have an LOA, that's all they have to do. It's up to you to decide. If you're going to spend $20,000, you better make sure that you've got all the right information to make sure that it's real, and it's not been marginalized by lack of your knowledge or relying on LOA that may be compromised in its content.
Yeah, good advice for sure, and like you pointed out, especially where some of these items are going for, you definitely want to do your homework, your research, lean on someone who maybe is more knowledgeable than even yourself. Maybe not in your case, but for someone else even, and that sort of thing. All right, folks, we're going to stop the interview right there. Keep this episode at a reasonable length, something we're trying to do on this program. Keep them under an hour when possible. So rather than make one big long episode, we're going to make this 2 parts. So this was part 1. Part 2 will be next Friday, December 1st, if you're scoring at home. Again, it'll be a shorter length episode. That way we broke them up into 2 parts. And a lot more interesting conversation in the second part as well. So as Marshall's definitely an interesting guy. So we're going to have we're going to have our Hobby is the People announcer next, and a couple closing thoughts, and we'll be back next week on this show with part 2 with Marshall Fogel.
Time for our Hobby is the People announcer of the week.
Hey, what's up? It's your boy Caleb, at Mr. Caleb on Twitter. And remember, the hobby is the people.
If you'd like to be the Hobby is the People announcer of the week, do a WAV or MP3 file and send it to sportscardnationpc@gmail.com.
That's a wrap for this week. Huge thanks to you, the listeners out there, because without you, there is no us. If you like the show, we truly appreciate positive reviews. Big ups to our great guests who drive the show and our awesome sponsors who make it all possible. Sports Card Nation will be back next week, but don't forget to catch either Hobby Quick Hits or Card Mentions coming up on Monday. I'll leave you with this. How do we change the world? One random act of kindness at a time. Remember, the hobby is the people.
For nearly 50 years, Sports Collectors Digest has been the voice of the hobby, bringing you comprehensive coverage of the sports collectible industry. From industry news, auction results, market analysis, and in-depth stories about collectors and their collections, Sports Collectors Digest has everything you need to know about the hobby. SCD is also your leading source for listings of sports collectible dealers, card shops, card shows, and the latest from the industry's top companies. To check out all the latest news or to subscribe to the hobby's oldest magazine, visit sportscollectorsdigest.com or call 1-800-829-5561.
Hobby Hotline is the hobby's only live interactive call-in show. Join some of your favorite hobby personalities every Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, and the first Tuesday of each month at 9 p.m. Eastern to discuss the hottest hobby topics. If you miss us live, catch us after the fact on all major podcast platforms. Follow us on socials at Hobby Hotline.